So good to see your face and hear your voice.
Years. A good long time. I don't know, at least for sure, at least 12 years, maybe longer, maybe 15 or so. Alexis is now, so, that kind of sounds about right.
It sounds about right. And, I hit midlife. Well, I guess I hit midlife a while ago, but I hit 50 a few months ago. And now I'm fixated on it. But I think it was a good time to kind of reassess what you have going on in the world, right? Especially as you look toward this next chapter. So it's really good to see you. And I hope we get some questions that we can bring to you from people, because I think that this has been a really tough year for a lot of people.
It really has been. I mean, the pandemic in and of itself, of course, has prompted so much loss in terms of loss of life and people getting sick and all. Economy, on people's finances, and the jobs factor, we're still, down 10 million jobs or so. And we know that women in particular have been hard hit, at least 2.5 million jobs lost for women during the pandemic and counting. But at the same time, just different segments of the population, people of color, people who are single also, who, if they have a reduction in income, it's like, okay, who do I fall back on? And so this whole concept of, trying to get your finances together in general, it's something that we need to be talking about, but it's been exacerbated. The sort of financial challenges that people face have been exacerbated during the pandemic.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And, the statistic of so many women leaving the workforce, either being pushed out of the workforce or forced to leave because of, of childcare and other responsibilities at home. And the numbers are really, I think the numbers really caught me off guard. I saw the report, maybe I saw it about a week or two ago, just really kind of diving into those numbers. I thought they were just staggering. And where do you go from here in terms of that? Because I think that it's forced a lot of people, obviously, we overuse the word, but to try to pivot, figure out what's going on next. Where do you do that? I mean, you sit at home and go, I don't even know where to begin. How can I talk about saving money when I either don't have a job or don't even know where I can barely make ends meet? How do I talk about saving money?
Yeah, like how do I start? Well, I think first it's important that we sort of acknowledge and kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive into two things you just mentioned. Some women are having to make a tough choice around childcare issues, for example. And, regardless of age necessarily, of course, it could be a new mom or something like that, or it could be somebody who's 40 or 50 and who has a 10-year-old. Or who has a younger grandkid, perhaps, that they're taking care of. So we know that in general, women bear most of the child care and child rearing responsibilities, right? So that's one factor that's kind of drawn women out of the workforce. But also it's the sectors and the industries in which women predominantly tend to work, things like hospitality, retail, transportation, and all of those have been super hard hit, as you know. And so again, we're seeing job losses in those areas and or reduction of income in those areas. Okay, so now we kind of get this, kind of double whammy that a lot of women are facing. And I think when you start to think about solutions, like, okay, well, what do I do if I don't have a job or I've had my income reduced? I think you have to do three main things. First, you have to, kind of not be too proud to ask for help, right? So sometimes, maybe you have a very middle-class lifestyle, or you never would have needed to reach out to ask for, SNAP benefits, let's say, which is food stamps, or you never would have even need to necessarily network, to get another job because you felt like you were safe and secure or whatever in your position. Well, now is not the time to be quiet about your needs, right? If you had a former boss or a job that, say, laid you off, you do want to reach out and ask for help. So don't be bitter about it. If your company, you might have, and I've been through a layoff, when I left.
Right, of course.
I think we talked about this when I left CNBC. I was downsized, me and 200 other people. I was like, I thought I have a contract.
I remember.
So, but if you have an employer, for example, that's going to offer you some benefits, retraining services, resume preparation services, an office where they'll let you use the address to have correspondences or whatever they offer. And now also with the American Rescue Plan that just got passed, COBRA benefits, you can get those paid for by the government 100% from April 1st through September, the end of September. So that's 6 months. So you get some healthcare coverage as well. Take advantage of those kind of benefits, right? So don't be too proud. Don't be bitter if your employer gave you the pink slip, or whatever, but just take whatever they have to offer. Likewise, on other benefits, maybe you were a freelancer, a contractor, a gig economy worker. Maybe you had a small business and it suffered, or it has been dramatically affected by COVID, or it completely failed. You're eligible for unemployment benefits. So again, that's a hybrid program, a federal and state program. You definitely want to reach out and get those benefits. Right now, as a matter of fact, because of the $900 billion stimulus bill that passed in December that we're still kind of working through right now, and again, because of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, there's a ton of money available for small business owners of every kind. I mean, anybody who got a 1099, okay? If you worked a side hustle, part-time job, a Uber, Lyft driver, a hairstylist, doesn't matter. If you March 31st, 2021, they're talking about extending it. But one of the things, I'm giving you all this information, but to say, don't be too proud, reach out, ask for that help. If you need it, tap into every benefit possible for which you might even remotely qualify.
And that kind of moves you in the ability to be able to do some type of a pivot, which we're seeing so many people do that. I work with it on a Broadway show, and a lot of, obviously when we talk about the gig actors and the jobs, they've been out of work. The Broadway shut down exactly a year ago. There's been no work. They've had to pivot. And I've seen people start candle companies, makeup companies. It's not easy. There's you don't just turn a key and it doesn't just work like that. But I've seen a lot of people do that. And when it comes to midlife, I've seen people say, whether they just do it or not do it, you know what, I'm not happy where I am, or I feel like I might be pushed out, so I want to do something different. That pivot's not easy, but wow, when you figure it out, and you did a pivot of your own,
I certainly did. And it was, again, after job loss, right?
Yeah.
But even to tie it into today's environment and the economic reality that we're dealing with today because of COVID and, the need for social distancing, and, we've dealt with different shutdown orders and things of that nature, that pivot is crucial. So I think the next strategy to kind of prepare and what to do is to think about creating a hybrid skill set or a hybrid business model for anything that you want to do. So, I was giving some advice to a guy who is in the South, who was and is the owner of a fitness center, a gym. And he was saying, I had all these clients, I had all these people who were coming in, largely a female, customer base. And they would come in and have one-on-one training with him or group classes, group fitness instruction. And so I was like, listen, hey, you got to get online. You have to go digital. No, you cannot train them one-on-one right now because of restrictions and because of COVID and the mask and everything else. However, let's see about getting you a website together. Let's see about little video snippets, do some training, create a subscription service, create a model where people can pay you for your expertise. Really, at the end of the day, part of what the pivot is involved in that pivot is getting people to pay you for your knowledge, your expertise, which you have to translate in some way. So the question becomes, how can I translate it? How can I, if I can't, like for me, for example, because I do speaking engagements and a lot of media and whatnot, as you know, literally in the last year, I've done 0 in-person, obviously, public speaking engagements, but I've still done a ton of speaking engagements. Why? Because I hopped online and I started doing a lot more webinars, virtual presentations, financial workshops, Zoom, WebEx, Cisco, Skype, etc. I've adapted the content and the delivery and what I'm doing to not let it be in person, but to go digital with it. And so everybody should be thinking, no matter what industry, what service or product you might be offering, think about, okay, we're going to get past COVID, knock on wood, I'll be in person and deliver products and services and whatnot. but in the meantime and in the future, for anything else that comes about, how can I deliver my services remotely? And so
that's the key. And I've seen so many, trainers do it, personal trainers do it, one-on-one trainers do it. It doesn't have to be that you have a group of 50 people in order to do that. And look, people are more accepting of it too. We're used to it now. We're used to seeing our newscasters in their back bedroom. We're used to seeing, we're used to seeing things that we didn't see literally 13 months ago. So I think it's so important. Okay, so you wrote a book, a New York Times bestseller, Zero Debt, The Ultimate Guide to Financial Freedom. You and I have both talked about it. Both of us have been in debt. I was $100,000 in debt after my divorce. It was, it was really, really, to say it out loud. I couldn't say it out loud for years. And you know that.
Yes.
And you went through something very, very similar.
Yeah. So, back in 2001, I had $100,000 in credit card debt. And this is when I was with my ex-husband. It took me 3 years to pay it all off. Fortunately, I, didn't miss any payments. And I was able to write this book, Zero Debt, afterwards, after I paid it off. And it kind of explained what I did. Tamsen, believe it or not, we're in the third edition now, 2019, the third edition of Zero Debt, because the debt problem in America has only gotten worse over time. But yes, even subsequent to my divorce, and again, you and I have been candid about this, I was the one who was paying alimony and child support to my ex, at the peak, over $6,500 a month. And on the low point, about $1,200 a month. So it was a hefty amount. And I did it for years, for 5+ years. So, thinking about the debt situation is really crucial, especially as we age, as we hit 50+, because you really don't want to start going into retirement or into the next act, whatever it is that you're going to do, saddled with so much debt from the past.
Well, and we're also hearing what are called gray divorces now, which is like, you're going into midlife, that rate has skyrocketed at the pandemic. And we should probably do another thing just talking about this, but the debt has skyrocketed, the gray divorces have skyrocketed. And then just also the pandemic just made people make different decisions, maybe even faster than they would have. If you look at that, though, it's not just the financial amount of money. I mean, it was a mental game with me too. Like that was really I'm telling you, I've always remembered your story, because when I went through it and it was, years later, I remember like, I can't believe, she was so vocal about it. I hid that I could not talk about it. I couldn't say it out loud. But I was ashamed.
And that's the thing. You definitely are not alone. Okay. So, and not only that, but a number of, I know media personalities, high level and across the country, people go through stuff, it's the reality.
Yeah, they do.
Remember I used to always talk about the dreaded D's, downsizing, divorce, a death in the family of the main breadwinner, disability or disease. And anytime one of those 5 things happens to you, and there's a whole bunch of other dreaded D's too, it can totally throw your finances out of whack, but it also kind of sets you off kilter, kind of mentally and emotionally. It's a lot of stuff to have to deal with. So I tell people, even though we really shouldn't feel shame or embarrassed or guilty and upset about our financial predicaments, the reality is that society does shame us, and there's so much, finger wagging and negativity associated with it. Part of the reason why I was able to cope with it is not just because of the financial background and some of the stuff that I was learning along the way, but at a certain point, I just kind of started looking at it like this. I just put on my business hat and I said, look, things like bankruptcy, I never filed for bankruptcy protection, but I said things like bankruptcy, which is kind of a last ditch, resort if you really just have to wipe out your debts, for example. I said, that's part of the safety net, and that's here for a reason, right? Companies do it all the time. Like businesses, they will reorganize their finances, come back bigger and better and stronger than ever. And it's seen and it's perceived on Wall Street and elsewhere as a smart move. Like, they're restructuring, they're reorganizing, they're right sizing. And they don't get there's no emotional blowback on the company. The brand, it could potentially be diminished and tarnished a little bit, but that'll be over like that.
Of course, it's considered a business decision.
Totally. But from a financial standpoint, it's the same thing. You're going to make the smartest financial / business decision for you that you can make given your circumstances. So that's why I tell people, like, don't feel guilty. Don't, feel ashamed about it.
Yeah.
Again, and that's part of why sometimes it's difficult for people to reach out and get help, because there's so many layers of shame and guilt, and that's kind of baked into it. But you're definitely not alone to for the experience and the problems that you face, and that sort of reluctance to kind of put it out there. I just happened to early on and to build a brand around, like, hey, y'all, look at this crazy problem that I had. I don't know how I did it. I got myself into $100,000 in debt, but look, I got out of it.
Right. I know. I remember after I did it, I was like, oh my gosh, it took me years to actually be able to talk about it. And I feel like being able to talk about it was a great thing, and to, figure out how to get out of it. And I didn't have the expertise you did, but I learned along the way. All right. Midlife, because I have, again, as I told you, I turned 50, a little fixated on it. I know I am, but I feel like this kind of Gen X, I'm seeing a lot of it out there. There's a lot of people that have that, they have a drive to do something else. They have a drive to figure out their next. They have a drive to kind of, sort out what's going on. And it's what my next book is about. And I like it because I feel like I look at somebody that is 60 years old or 50 years old, and they completely change their career and they love it and they have a great time with it. And they're doing it now at this point, because it's what they really want to do. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that it's important for people at this stage in life to be making the money, if they can do that in the place that they feel passionate.
Sure. Well, I can tell you about this from a personal and a professional standpoint. So first of all, I'm Gen X, just like you are. Mm-hmm. So I know what it's like to hit that 50 mark as well. And the reality is that in my business, which I've had now for 18 years, I started this company in March 2003, after, again, I was laid off from my job as a Wall Street Journal reporter for CNBC. Right. So the pivot for me was sort of pushed upon me, right? I had no choice but to do something. Now I did have, I had an offer to go to CNN. I could have done some other things and stayed in the job market. However, I decided, okay, I'm going to pursue this path towards entrepreneurship. And I am so glad that I did. I mean, I have so much more flexibility and freedom. I love the work that I'm doing. And if I'm really honest, I do a lot of the exact same things that I did when I was a reporter as a financial journalist, except that now I do it for myself. I pick and choose my clients. I make a lot more money even than I made myself.
Amen.
And I get to say, like, okay, I really like this, but nope, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I have a team that works with me, and it's awesome. So I love it. I know what that's like. But also professionally, I was sharing with your producer, I work with AARP. They're a client of mine. I work with them since 2010. So I'm really tapped into what a lot of 50 plus folks have experienced with regard to second act. And here's a couple things I can tell you based on that. One is that most people who do the pivot or go off and branch out and do something that they kind of always wanted to do or just try their hand, they are so happy that they've done it. And they feel like, what took me so long? Some of the, regret, if there's any, is around, I should have done this way sooner. I should have done this before. And so I do want to encourage your audience, those who might be thinking about doing something different. It feels risky. I'm going to be honest with you. It feels
of course. I'm
X years away. I'm 10 years away, 15 years away from retirement, or I'm, can I afford, quote unquote, to take this risk? Should I? Is it even prudent for me to do so at this time? And I think the main thing is to really do your homework. I don't believe in betting the farm. I don't believe in taking, imprudent risks that, aren't properly calculated. I do believe in going for it when you've done your homework, when you've made sure that you've had a plan B that you put in place as well. And when you've considered different kind of what if scenarios, right? So you don't want to just impulsively just go, you know what, I just always want to do it. So I'm throwing everything into this, kind of
course.
That's being imprudent. However, you know what? The advantage of being now 50 and 50 plus is that we tend to have a lot more life experience, a broader network, a range of skills and skill sets, frankly, that are transferable that you can take with you. If you know about operations or technology or managing people or hiring, or you just know a certain industry super well, all of that is going to serve you well in the new thing, whatever that thing might be, right? So I really want people to think about the value that they bring to any enterprise or any new initiative when you are 50 plus, because I'm telling you, was I ready at age 30? Heck no.
Oh gosh, I don't even remember who I was.
No,
I don't remember who I was.
Exactly. And you think you know when you're 30 something, you think you know, but no, you don't know.
Well, I knew that, right? But not now. Oh, you're so great to talk to. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about it. And the reason we named this Coming Up Next is because it really is, I think, what it's all about, whether it's in a relationship or a job or, whatever part, just your passion. I don't know. One question I want to ask you before you go, Culture is asking your thoughts about investing. Bitcoin is now exploding in the marketplace.
Ooh, okay. I will. Do I have 60 seconds? Or what do I have?
60. Take 60.
Okay. So
probably takes us 6 hours. I don't know.
I've written about Bitcoin, and if you go to my site on askthemoneycoach.com, that's the free financial advice site. If you go up there and you see my content up there right now, I kind of poo-pooed Bitcoin, 2 or 3 years ago. I was like, I gave people the straight and dirty advantages and disadvantages. And mostly I talked about how unregulated it was, and it was, riskier, and it shouldn't be the whole of your portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. In 2020, I became a Bitcoin believer. So I will say that I do think there's there. I'm more a fan of blockchain technology as opposed to Bitcoin itself, although I have both some direct exposure to Bitcoin, but mostly to Bitcoin stocks that my husband and I invested in personally in 2020 and in 2021. And I can tell you, because tend to be aggressive investors and the high risk tolerance, our Bitcoin is doing extremely well. That's not to say it's prudent for everybody, but I do think it's worth a percentage, 5% or so of a person's investment portfolio.